All right, let's get into it. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to be documenting a model known as market DNA. Specifically, we're looking at the DJ30 asset, and we're tracking a cycle identified as cycle 2.
So think of this as just a straightforward record of events. We're looking at the market DNA model as it was applied to the DJ30, specifically for the cycle ID DJ30_2_3. Our goal here is simply to document what happened, step by step.
Okay, so first up is phase 1. This is all about the initial plan. It's the blueprint, really, laying out all the parameters that were set at the very beginning of this cycle. Let's take a look at what they were working with.
So let's break down the basic parameters here. The asset, of course, is the DJ30, or the Dowjones. This whole thing kicked off on March 6th, 2026. The plan called for a trapezoid time of 14 days and a risk coefficient, or R, set to 1. These are the foundational numbers for this cycle's plan.
Now, all the calculations you're about to see are based on a hypothetical capital of $100,000. Using a standard number like this just makes it easier to document and compare different cycles on an equal footing. And with that capital comes a risk parameter. For this plan, the expected maximum drawdown was set at 5%. That's a really key number when you're looking at managing the potential downside.
Another important input for the calculations is the contract size. For this cycle, it was set to 10 units. It's just one more piece of the puzzle that helps determine the position sizing within the plan.
So you might be asking how all these pieces come together. Well, the documentation is very specific about the calculation, and it requires we read this statement exactly as written. Both trade sizes are calculated using the hypothetical capital, the investor's maximum allowed drawdown, the third triangle domain percentage, the risk coefficient, and the contract size. Okay, so what was the actual plan for getting in? The model identified a primary entry, what it calls M, at 47,526.6. There was also a secondary entry, PC, at 46,908.2. That gives us a mean entry point of 47,217.4. And based on all those parameters we just saw, the trade size for each of those entries was calculated to be 0.13. Of course, every plan needs targets. For this cycle, there were 3 of them. The first one, T1, was at 47,633. That's labeled as the mirror or lower trapezoid. Target 2 was set at the apex N, which is 48,346. And the final objective, T3, was all the way up at the trapezoid top, 49,035.
And here's what it all looked like on the chart back on March 6th. You can see the geometric structure laid out. Here are those entry points, M and PC down here. And then you can see the targets laid out above. T1, the apex N for T2, and the trapezoid top for T3. This was the roadmap for the cycle.
So the plan was set. Now we move on to what actually happened. Phase 2 is all about the first key event that was documented, the price making contact with the trapezoid. This is where we see the model meet the market. And here we go. The documentation shows that after positions were opened at both M and P, the price began to move. And then, on April 7th, it hit our first target at 47,633. This event is what's called contact with the trapezoid lower boundary. It was the first major checkpoint in the plan. At the end of this documented phase, a simple question was posed. You know, it's the kind of thing you'd write in a logbook. It just says, will the next phase be phase 3? It's a natural question, right? Is the momentum going to continue? Well, that question brings us right to the next entry in our documentation, phase 3, which is called the N event. This is the next significant milestone in the cycle's progression. Let's see what the records show. And the answer to that question was a yes. Just look at this. The documentation for April 14th shows that the price kept going, right up to that apex N price level of $48,346. That means target 2 was officially reached, a really clear progression from one phase to the next, just as outlined in the initial plan. And now we're up to the present. The record for phase 3 ends with a very familiar question. Will the next phase be phase 4? We've seen the plan play out through 2 targets, but there's still one more to go. So what happens next is what we're all waiting to see. All right, before we wrap up, we need to go through some quick but very important disclaimers. Please stick with me for a second here. This is the necessary stuff. First, and most importantly, nothing here is financial advice. We are simply documenting a model. Second, the rules of this model prohibit using leverage above 10. Also, please never invest essential personal funds. And remember, this whole analysis is just part of a public documentation effort. We're only describing the events that are visible on the charts. And that pretty much brings us up to speed on the documentation for cycle ID DJ30_2-3. We've walked through the plan and the events as they've unfolded so far, but as we saw, the big question remains. Will we see a phase 4? I guess time will tell. If you want to see more documentation like this, you can head over to marketdnaedge.com. Thanks for joining me for this one.